Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Brandt Brinkerhoff, owner of Aesc Games, an indie board game studio dedicated to crafting unique, clever, obsession-worthy games. And his first game, the highly anticipated award-winning title Oros, is currently on Kickstarter. He's going to talk to us about it today. Brandt, you got to be just on cloud nine. Welcome to the binge, my friend. How you doing?
I'm great. Absolutely cloud nine. Just being here with you. So, I mean, that's all that it takes.
That's
to
like,
get me
forget the Kickstarter, just to be able to talk.
That's right. No, just being here, like boom, hit the top of my day.
Man, oh man, we're going to get into this Kickstarter. It is doing incredibly. Not only is award winning, you've got just tons and tons of people on social media. I'm sure most people that is listening right now have heard of this game because it is all over social media. Everybody's giving it massive props. I checked it out. It looks awesome, but we're going to get into it in a second. First, I want to start off with, like, this is your first game. So, like, what do you do for a living besides board game design?
Yeah. So I'm a graphic designer, at least a trained graphic designer. I've been working in the graphic design industry for, just under 20 years or so, 16, 17 years or so.
Wow.
And I've worked across this whole broad spectrum of things, everything from branding and marketing to user experience design to app development and all sorts of things. So I already have like this pretty diverse skill set, I suppose, in creating things and also in solving problems and creative problem solving.
Sure.
So it all definitely translates. I mean, definitely my background translates into this game.
Are you like a freelance guy right now that has like a strong tech background from working with some large companies, or how does that fit?
No. So I'm actually, I worked at agencies. I used to live in Chicago, worked at an agency in Chicago for about 10 years.
Nice.
Then I moved to Utah, worked at another agency for another 3 or 4 or 5 years, something like that. Worked closely with Adobe. I was running the Adobe account for that client for a long time. And then now I'm actually a creative director at a company called 1-800-Contacts, and I'm part of their business incubation group. So part of what we do is we form new businesses, and we do all of the branding, all the creative work, all of the upfront work to be able to launch businesses for them. So
there's a number of transferable skills in here that he just touched on. I'm going to touch on each of them. So one is the fact that you're graphic design, right? So did you do your own graphic design for this game, or did you kind of farm that out? Or
I've done everything for the game. So everything that you've seen is something that I've done. So I did all the graphic design, all the artwork, all the videos, all the page work, all of the rendering, all the whatever, all the animation. I've done all of it.
That is incredible. And I think that that's probably a good suite of skill sets to have. Because if you're having to farm out, a lot of people, either maybe if they're illustrators, they'll farm out the graphic design, the graphic designers, they'll farm out the illustration,
right.
Or they'll farm out the videos and things like that. So the fact that you're doing all of that yourself, that's crazy. But amazing.
It's honestly crazy. And which is why it's taking me so long to be able to actually get to this point.
Yeah.
I've had a really long runway, which has been really good.
Yeah.
But also, like, when you're the person doing all the things, you can only split yourself up so many ways. And, I have a family. I've got 4 kids and full-time job. I've got all this other stuff going on. So there's only so much that you're able to accomplish in a day, So.
And then the other part I was going to say is that if you're building businesses or starting or incubating businesses, that's another huge skill set when it comes to game development and game publishing, right? Is the whole project management side and the whole kind of bringing all the components together and figuring out, the manufacturing and the distribution and all that. So the fact that you've kind of come with the suite of skill sets, you've almost got like the perfect kind of toolkit on your belt to launch like a board game in the industry, I guess I'd say.
I mean, I guess so, right? I sure hope so. No, it's working out really well so far. And like, that's actually one of the reasons why I took that job at 1-800-Contacts, because I actually wanted more exposure to that side of like what it takes to start a business and what it takes, how all that stuff works. And so it's been really good to be able to connect with a lot of people who do startup, that live in the startup culture. And so it's been really interesting. It's definitely helped me on my side, right? Like with the publishing side and the manufacturing side and arranging. There's a lot to arrange when you're publishing. You don't really think about what it takes. I think until you start getting into it, you don't really realize what it takes to even run a Kickstarter.
Yeah.
alone, which is that's its own project, right? Like that's not even connected. It's its own beast.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, like actually to publish a game, it's kind of crazy, like all the things that go into it.
So how long have you been gaming for? Is this something that you've been doing your whole life, like board gaming specifically, or is it, what's kind of your background in gaming itself?
Man, even back in like 20 years ago in high school, I was, drumming up friends to play Settlers of Catan, like I've been gaming for a really, really long time. I've always been kind of a game nerd, board game nerd. And even when we were living in Chicago, we'd get our neighbors over, we were always getting people to come over and play board games. So it's always been a passion of mine. It's not something that I'd ever even thought about. Like I never made the connection of like what I do professionally and what I enjoy as a hobby, and making those two things connect before until I started working on this project. And then I was like, wait a second, I actually have a lot of the skill set needed to be able to do this.
So where did the idea for this come from? Like, how did you come up with this idea for this game?
So it started when I moved from Chicago, moved to Utah, and across the street lived a guy. His name is Charles, and he loved designing games. And so we kind of connected, and he very quickly he was like, you like games, you design stuff. This is going to be a really great relationship here, right? Like, let's talk. And so we would sit and, would sit in nights and we'd play some of the games that he had created, or like he would show me different ideas of things. And so this game actually started with Charles. He had this idea of just like a map and things that would shift around. Is basically like playing Labyrinth or something, it was just like a shift. And, it wasn't really a game. It's just like, wouldn't this be so cool if there's a globe and there's plate tectonics?
Yeah.
And when he like said that, I was like, what? Like, there's something here. And like, I didn't sleep the whole night. I was up like writing notes, all these ideas. The next day I went to him with like notes. I'm like, dude, what if there were like volcanoes? What if you're forming mountains? What if things were like exploding? What if there was earthquakes? What if? And he was like, dude, if you can make that into a game, you like go and make a game. I want to see what you can do. And so that's really what kind of started this whole thing. I went and got a pizza box and started cutting out tiles and, testing ideas. A lot of things didn't work at all. A lot of things were just horrible, but that's what started the whole thing. And that was like 5 years ago. It's been like a whole.
I was going to say how long ago that was. So it was 5 years ago. So at that time, was the idea that you just wanted to you had an idea for a game, you just want to create a game, or was it at that time the spark kind of saying, we got something here that maybe we can take kind of the whole way?
Oh yeah. I like the idea of a plate tectonic based game. Like it really sparked inspiration. Like I was like, there's something so good in here. And I think that's also the same thing with a lot of people as they see the games, they see it in motion, or especially as you start to interact with it.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so special. And that's what I felt was so special. And that's one of those things that as you're developing it, it's really easy to get distracted into different paths. And you start making things that are like outside the heart. And that's one of those things is like, no, if this isn't part, if this is ancillary to that heart, that core of the game, which is what makes it so special, then it doesn't belong. Like we've got to make a game that, we've got to develop around this, the beating heart of this thing, because that's really what makes it special. And I think that's still what makes it special when people play with it. So
when did you have your first prototype? Like, so 5 years ago, the idea there of plate tectonics kind of, set off the light bulb in the head, say, wow, this is something that's kind of unique in terms of mechanic. When did you have your first kind of playable prototype? How long did that take?
Like 2 weeks, maybe. So
okay.
I had, and like I said, the whole first prototype was on the back of a pizza box, and it was because we had ordered pizza the day before and I had a box. And so I was like, that's a big piece of cardboard. I'll work with that. And I cut everything up, and I had drawn all these things like the tiles, and it just really rudimentary, right? It's like color in the edges, like, okay, that has 2 edges here and that one has 2 edges there. And then I don't know how other people do things like this, but I would sit in our living room and I'd play the game. It's 4 players, right? I'd play one, I'd stand up, go to the next spot, play the game. And I would do that over and over and over again. I probably played it, I don't know, 10, 15 times before, and working out kinks and stuff until I was like, okay, this is actually working. Now let's rope in the people who you love, who are willing to sit down and mess around with a pizza box board game and actually play it with you. And then, find new things to break. And then I'd sit and play it again 10 or so times. until I had fixed those problems, and then I'd get someone else to play it, and then I'd, repeat that process over and over again until it was really fluid, right? And then I started actually creating things that were a little bit more dressed up, just so, because when you're asking people to play test games, you're asking them to invest themselves in something that they often don't want to do. So the better you can make it look, the better you can make the experience, the more likely that they're going to say, wow, that was okay. I'll be willing to play again.
Yeah, there's a big difference between taking like a prototype that you get from like a game crafter prototype, for instance, is actually, even if it's like using clip art, but like is polished and looks like an actual game, versus something that's like hand drawn on little pieces of paper and cardboard. I mean, you can get people to play both, but you're gonna have a lot more people say, "Nah, I'm good," on the hand drawn version versus the polished version, right? So
it's so true. Yeah. And even like the very first like real printed versions I had made, I still like drew artwork for the tiles. It was like really blobby and like not that great, but I still like did some rough things just so when I printed it out and we were playing, people would still feel like this is a real game, right? Like this is a legitimate experience. And then they stop commenting on like the things you already know, right? It was like, this would be really great if it had like more color in it. And you're like, it's cardboard.
Yeah.
Like, and so they stop commenting on that and they start commenting, like giving actual feedback about the game. Right. And so I found it very valuable I always had like some visual, the game always looked pretty.
Yeah.
No matter what phase you were playing it in, it was still produced, as cheap as I could make it.
Sure.
It's still a prototype, and you don't want to just burn through your resources to play once and then be like, well, gotta make everything again because I have to change everything.
And in fairness, I think illustration from someone who's an illustrator, even rough, is going to look a lot better than probably me doing illustration. Right. So
that's true. Yeah. I mean, it depends on what you do. Right. And it's a little unfair when, people don't have that artistic background.
These deities are demigod. Was that right from the beginning? So the plate tectonics is in there from the beginning. Was the whole idea like building shrines and the deities and things was that all from the beginning, or when did that kind of come
No. So I mean, the game started honestly as just like a tile shifting thing. And in 2019, I had entered into the Chris Anderson runs the board game design workshop.
Yep.
And a friend of mine had told me about it. I was like, okay, cool. And so I submitted the game to it, and it quickly got moved over to the next round.
Wow.
And part of the feedback I got, I think it was actually a comment from Chris Anderson himself. He said, how do I have power to do this? Like, this is really cool, but how in the world do I have, how can I move land? How can I collide land together? That doesn't make any sense. I'm not just a person. Like, there's clearly some power behind me. And that's where it's kind of like, you know what? You're totally right. Like, you've got to have some reason to have power to be able to do what you're doing. And that actually kind of just shaped the anthropological side of the whole game too, because it really started to tap into some of the things that I'm really passionate about culture and anthropology and the way that people interact. And then also you're making mountains during the game. And I live among the mountains. I'm a big mountain fan. And so there's also this association with mountains that histories have been written about, people going to mountains to gain knowledge and wisdom. So the theme kind of started to seep in as soon as that question was asked, how am I able to do this? And it kind of started to come to life, which also actually became a really integrated part in the game. You can't really remove it either, because it's so integrated into what's happening in the game. That it ties together. So
after that competition, did you massage the game? And then when did you enter into the ION Awards? When did that come?
Yeah, right after that workshop ended, it was a few weeks later, and the ION submission was due. And I wasn't even thinking of entering, honestly. And I think it was Charles who was like, you just put it in. Why wouldn't you just put it in? You already have a video. You already have a game that's gone through 9 months of workshopping. Yeah. You should just put it in. And so I entered it, and it again went, did well, and it won the ION. So
did you make tweaks after with the feedback you got?
So many tweaks.
Yeah. So what did you change in that one?
So I changed the name by the time it hit ION.
Okay.
I completely changed the name of the game. And by that point, let me think. It was still a deck building game at that point. There were still cards that you're using, which still had some friction to it. It just didn't quite work. So there was a lot of little massage things, nothing really big notable. The scoring system definitely changed a lot in that little phase there. That had always been one of those things that was really difficult to iron out. It's like, is this a score track? You know, is this your traditional, like, get the biggest number?
Yeah.
And that took a long time to figure out. It was even after the Ion before I've landed on where the scoring is today, which again is just like so integrated into the game. It feels so much better than like your typical Carcassonne, like, you know, keep track of the score while you're playing type of game.
Yeah.
And so again, it's just those, it takes time to develop a game. It takes time for a game to mature.
What I think is cool, what you're saying is like, so 5 years. So a lot of people I talk to will say, well, you know, we've been developing for the past year, and they get to it. But, you know, a 5-year journey tells me it's gone through a lot of iterations, right? Like you iterated this and iterated, took a lot of feedback. I mean, the fact that you made changes after the first competition, then into another competition, made more changes, shows that really you wanted to get the game right before you launch, which I think is important. And I think that's what comes through when you see some of these reviews from people, right? And some of the people that have been reviewing this are almost giddy when they're talking about it, right? Because they haven't seen anything like this, quite like this in quite some time, right? To have really kind of new mechanics, new thematic, new combination worker placement and so forth. And that's cool, right? When people get giddy talking about your game, then it says you're probably on the right track, right? You're heading the right way.
That's like so exciting. Yeah. Like every time we get a review, you're like, oh please, like, I hope they liked it. And it's so exciting. Yeah. When people immediately identify that, like, this is unlike anything, right? Like this, there's something really special here. Yeah. Once you learn what's going on, and then even learning how to master the game, it takes a long time to, you know, it's got a lot into it.
Replayability and so forth. I'm actually sharing my screen right now for people that are watching the interview live, for people who want to come back and watch it afterwards. We're going to actually go through the game itself and kind of the Kickstarter page. Let me start off by just saying congrats on your funding. I'm going to put this in Canadian dollars because that's the way I can see, because I'm actually in Canada. Numbers always look bigger too, so that's good as well. So you're at $276,000 on, I think it was like a $26,000 goal. So you're more than 10 times your funding goal. Congrats on that. That's amazing. 3,619 backers last I checked. Maybe there's been more since we started talking. You do have 55 hours to go. The exciting part about that is now you're coming into that back end hockey stick, right? The last 2 days, last 48 hours is when, again, you do like a huge amount of volume comes in. So I'm sure these numbers are going to climb significantly. I think just as we're going on air, you were saying something about some more stretch goals were unlocked or something like that. Do you want
we just hit one of the milestones, just like right as we started, and was like, oh, I got to post an update. I'll have to post it after.
So what was the milestone? Can you say, or?
What did we unlock, or what? Yeah. We hit 220,000 US dollars, and what we just added was printing all through the inside of the box. So so it gives it that like nice, really nice finished feel, right? As you open things up, and it just feels like it's all complete. It's like everything's been considered. I love that.
That's what I love about it. When people print inside the game, it just shows that they care about detail, right? Little things, which really don't really matter at the end of the day, but it's actually a little touch to help it make it a showpiece when it's on the table, right? When you're doing game night and you have people come by and they see the box opened up and there's just graphics and artwork everywhere. People are like, wow, you know, what is that, right? And you want that kind of stopping power. So that's super cool. Can you talk about or give us kind of the gist of how this game works?
Sure. Okay. So what makes it special is there's a map in the center of the table. And that map is like a shared environment. It's like a world that exists. And there are little land tiles on there. And those tiles have land and water. And you have the power to move and shift and collide those land masses. Your ultimate goal is to collide them together, make them bigger and bigger to form mountains. Yeah. And so that shared environment is a kinetic like a space where everybody exists and everybody's got their hands and fingers in it, right? And so that part of it is where people usually say, like, this feels like a video game, not a board game.
Yeah, it actually reminded me of an app that I used to play. It was called like 2048 or something like that, where you're smashing like ones together and they form a 2, and then the 2 smash together form a 4. So it's not quite double like that, but like if you smash like a tile in your game with like a valued 1 and one that's a 3, then that's going to make a 4. So you replace that. Exactly. 1 tile's worth 4, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And if you ever go over 4, it starts to form volcanoes.
Yeah,
so
cool.
volcanoes are like inert land that's sitting up above the tile.
Yeah.
So you can still crash the tiles together, and those volcanoes just keep getting bigger and bigger. And then part of the game is you can erupt those volcanoes, essentially like converting them back into tiles. So as you play the game, like things get like tighter and tighter and tighter until people are like, I've got to erupt volcanoes because we need more tiles, right? We need more land. And so you start pouring it back out. So there's this contraction and expansion to the game. But what it does is it's a very interesting thing, because like, oh, there's land on that side of me, but I need it on that side of me. I can push it this way, and then I can erupt it that way. And you have complete control, right? Like you can control the environment, but that's the catch. Like everybody has control. And so you're working on your thing, but the other people are like, no, I want it over there. Like I need it my way, And so there's this competition that's happening inside the middle. And that's like to describe it as like, it's just like a shifting puzzle that's just constantly in motion.
Yeah.
And everyone's in there. And so,
and it's like a globe that's flattened, right? So if you go off one end of the board, you can come back on this side.
Correct. Yeah.
I think at one point you can even shift them around circular around the circumference of the board. So there's so many different ways you can be shifting these tiles, right? And that's kind of the puzzle. And a lot of people that reviewed this said, wow, it's very puzzly, when you're trying to think ahead and you're managing your player board, but you're still thinking of kind of where I'm going to go next. But then someone else does something which influences that, which then you got to change your plans. And
yep. Yeah. But the good news is, like, when you do have to change your plans, there's always something for you to do.
Yeah.
Like that, you never get like cornered to a point where you're like, well, I've got 3 actions, I can't do anything with them, because that's just not the case. You always are able to do something, which is, I don't know, it's really interesting. But it does, like the map itself, it encourages creativity, I think. Like especially people who see spatial puzzles, or people who like kind of like think outside the box. They think like, oh wait, if I have a diagonal power and I go there, I can diagonally jump to the opposite side of the map.
Yeah.
Nobody can do that. Like I can have control, right? Or like, oh, I can connect things in different ways that mostly, that you might not think can connect, but they actually do connect to be able to get you to, be able to accomplish whatever it is you're doing. So
yeah,
there's this really fun dynamic thing that's happening on the table in front of you. But then there's the second half of the game, which is your player board.
Yeah, I'm just showing.
And your player board is just as
awesome.
Dynamic. It's and part of this, like as I've been developing it, part of it has always been about making sure every element is active and dynamic, and that they're all like so tightly interconnected that you can't just like, oh, well, let's just take that part out and like the game would be better. It's like, you just can't take anything out, and that's, to me, that's what a good game is, right? It's like, it's been so distilled down to like its essence. So anyway, the player board, the way you take actions is you move your followers to different action spaces. And when they're on an action space, they're covering in that action space, so you can't use it again. So if you want to use that same action, you're gonna have to move off of it, take a different action, and then come back to take that action. And so there's this little like weaving puzzle that's also happening as you're like trying to make sure that you're always leaving the right actions open at the right sequence at the right time, or planning ahead, so like for your next turn you're going to be ready to be able to use the right actions. So that's a whole other like dynamic side that a lot of reviewers talk about that side too. Like they almost like that as much as everything else.
Yeah. And you got to decide whether you're going to even bring more followers onto that board, because you can end up blocking yourself. So you have the benefit of the additional kind of experience points, but the same and more actions, but at the same time, you can end up blocking yourself and prevent you from doing what you want to do. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And it's kind of like flipping worker placement on its head. Cause usually in worker placement games, the more, the very first thing everybody does is unlock the next worker, because that means more actions. But in this game, you always have 3 actions, and that never changes.
Yeah.
So more workers is actually more difficult. It opens up possibilities to get more wisdom and get more points.
Yeah.
But like the more workers you have, the harder it is to play. And so, if you're unlocking those guys, like you have to have planned in advance, like how am I going to use them?
Yeah.
So it doesn't end up clogging up my board and making it difficult for me to actually play my turn. And so, yeah, it's fun little things like that, right? That like kind of take a mechanic, like so everybody's familiar with worker placement by this point, but now it's different. Like that's a very different worker placement experience. So, and
then you can use your wisdom. So you're getting wisdom, which you then can spend to then level up your like experience, like your skill tree, right? So you got your player board is basically a skill tree. It allows you to do all these different kind of actions, which in those skills can actually be better. So instead of just moving like 3 tiles one way, you can move them 2 ways, and then if you can keep leveling that up, for instance, then you can maybe move 1 diagonally and things. Is that fair to say? Is that good a description?
Yep. So wisdom is like currency in the game. You gain wisdom by building sacred sites and doing other things in the game, because studying and returning from study, you'll get wisdom. But every time you get wisdom, you get to move one of those little caps up, which means you get more power, or you can invest your wisdom in points too. Cause that's kind of the dichotomy that's getting tugged and pulled on, right? Is that like you can invest wisdom in power, which makes it a little easier to play the game, but power doesn't give you points. That doesn't help you win.
Yeah.
You have to like balance, when am I investing in the point side of the tech tree as much as the ability side. And usually the person who wastes the least, who's the leanest with like, I think I just need these abilities and that will get me by, and then invest everywhere else into points. Usually that's the one that's going to end up winning. So it's, but you have to know, where do you make that transition from points into power and stuff like that.
The other thing I think was really cool is that the sacred sites, right? So you're kind of building your temples up. So normally when you're moving, your movement would be from one tile to the other. But once you've built up the steps, you're adding layers of these like little tiles on top of your tiles, or smaller tiles, I guess, that are these different shapes. And they build up to kind of create like a temple on the top of that tile. So your movements, I thought was interesting, is when you're on the top of that temple, you're actually using movements within that tile to step down kind of the mountain before you can then move off of it to another tile. I hadn't really seen that in other games. Where did you come up with that idea?
Well, I think I remember one playtest where I had started like experimenting with like the idea of like sacred sites and things that were being built on mountains. And they were originally just like little things that were on the tile. And one of the playtesters was like, dude, these should stack like a staircase.
Yeah, it's cool.
And again, it was like, yes, they should. They should absolutely stack like a staircase. And he's like, it should be big, little, littler. And so with that idea, and as soon as like people say like little things like that, right? Where you're like, this should stack like a staircase, and they don't think about it further than that. Yeah. But it's like one of those little light bulbs. You're like, wait, like that's actually really good. Like that's some really, that's a really good idea. There's a lot to it. Yeah. So that's really kind of was born. And then, as you play test it, that's where it really gets refined into like, well, what, why? With that, with the building of the sacred sites and how they stack, what it does is it creates a staircase. Yeah. So there's a mountain at the bottom, and your sacred sites create a staircase on the way up. And something that people often say when they're playing is, oh, do I have to climb to the top to build at the top? And I say, no, you just have to be on the mountain. If you're on the mountain, you can always build. The cost is not climbing up. The cost is climbing down. And that's when they're like, oh yeah, that stinks. I have to climb down. Ugh. So when you build, your follower jumps up to the top. They immediately start to study. So they get to move all the way to the top. And usually people are like, I'm at the top. I've won. And then they realize that like, no, if they want to use that follower, now they have to walk down. And that's a huge cost. Yeah. So building at the top is a great reward, but it comes at a really hefty cost. And then
the third element was there was this, I'm trying to think of the name of it, where you've got like a scoreboard you're going up, and it's like a little pyramid.
Yeah, called the ascension track. It's like a step pyramid looking thing.
And then in that, again, it's another kind of element that you're thinking of, and it kind of remind me a little bit of patchwork. For anybody who's played patchwork, to get over the next player, if they're ahead 2 moves, well, you're just kind of skipping ahead to get over them. There's some elements of that, I guess. So if you're moving forward like 2 spaces and someone occupies 1, then you get to kind of leapfrog them. What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so that's a really important part of the game. A lot of people see it and they're like, score track, got it. And it's not a score track at all. Like the person who's at the top doesn't always win the game. In fact, like of all the games I've tracked, which is like 150 or something like that, of all the stats across all the games, it's only like 30% of the time is the person at the top who's going to win the game. So, but it's as integrated into the strategy as all the rest of the parts. You have to be paying attention to that ziggurat and your position on it, because when you build, you'll always step two steps forward. And if you land on a space that's occupied by someone else, you get to just keep moving forward. Now, each one of those spots on that ascension track are worth a point. So if you can take 2 steps and really get 5 steps out of it, what was 2 points turned into 5 points, right? Yeah. And so there's a little bit of a strategy in like figuring out how to pace what you're doing to take advantage of that. Or some people have like said like, well, actually I want to hold back. I'm not going to worry about points there, because if I can extend the game, I might actually be able to pick up more points doing this other thing. And so some people also like unlock it in a different way and
Yeah.
use it in different ways to be, so it's a strategic thing. I've seen people at the very bottom of the ascension track, or like last place, not at the bottom, but they're usually like on spot 10 or 11. They're not in the lead at all, and they win because of how they strategically took advantage of that. So it's much a part of the game as anything else. It's not something you can just ignore and think like, again, like Carcassonne, where you're just like, moving forward, as long as you're in the lead, you're winning. And it's not the case in this game. Yeah.
And then you also have this, again, there's more, right? So the Automa decks, right? So you've got each of these player boards flip over and they become like AI players, right? Yeah. So what was the thinking behind that? Is it because the game the game has to be 3 players and up, I guess. So even if you only have 2 people playing, you then trigger the third person would be basically an AI player. Is that kind of the general idea, or?
Yeah. And so solo was like top priority.
Yeah.
For me, like I was like, game has to be able to play solo. And so that was really what drove like where I landed with the Automa system. Again, that Automa system took months and months.
Did you design it yourself, or did you have help?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Wow. Again, like everything, I did it all.
Yeah. It's a lot of
work. And I tried a lot of different things and play tested a lot of different ways. And it just was never quite right. It never quite felt right, because it was like just trying to enable, like what most Automas do. They just like kind of enable the game, and it doesn't feel like it's really an active part of the game. And where the Automa ended is that each of the player boards flip over. Each of them has their own deck of cards, and all of those decks of cards, they share the same actions, but they're all weighted differently. And so each of the Automa actually has a bit of a personality. They engage with the game just like a regular player does, right? And so they kind of take that role of an extra player, which ends up being really interesting. So it does require 3 people to play the game, because you have 3 sacred sites that can be built per mountain. Yeah. And if you don't have 3, you can't actually complete the game. It has to have at least 3 active people, active demigods. But with the Automa, if you're playing solo, you just throw in 2 of those, and it's a really interesting competition, and it's a legitimate competition. I've weighted them. So like they're things that you have to beat. Yeah. You have to, it's just like playing a boss on a video game. Yeah. You have to figure out its weakness. You have to figure out its strengths. You have to figure out how to play against it and how to win against it. And so I've given little hints on like, try this one first. This is what they're kind of doing. But
because different personalities, you would think that if somebody's like a newer player, they might say, well, I want to play with this kind of this Automa player instead of maybe the other one that might be a little bit harder. So there's some general hints you give them as to which ones might be a little more harder than others, or?
Yeah, well, so they're all listed with like a difficulty rating. So the water demigod, she's listed as friendly, and she really is. She's just very enabling. Yeah. You can still. I actually played. Who did I play with? I played with someone and we totally lost to her. We played a 2-player game and she totally destroyed us because we just kind of kept feeding her. We weren't like playing carefully enough to make sure that she didn't, overwhelm us. But water is very simple. And then there are 2 that are competitive, that kind of take 2 different approaches to being competitive, but like they're interesting. And then there's one that's kind of like insanity mode, fire. The fire demigod, he's listed as aggressive, and he's insanely aggressive. He's very difficult to beat. I always just like shake my head because there's a number of reviewers that are like, yeah, I made my video. And then I see them like, I set up fire as the Automa. I'm like, why are you setting up fire? It's like the first time you've played. But
so with this campaign, there's no doubt that this game is well thought out, well designed. It's got a huge amount of kudos right across, all the content creators that I've watched, all are pretty unanimous saying they absolutely love this game. What are some of the things you did from a marketing standpoint to kind of get the word out as a first time kind of Kickstarter?
So my road to Kickstarter has been over a year and a half. So, and I did not know what I was doing a year and a half ago. So it was a lot of just like picking up advice from people. I set up the Kickstarter page a year and a half ago. Nice. So like it was forever ago. Right. So, and I don't know how people found it. But I kept like growing, numbers kept growing, and I couldn't even figure out how to get Kickstarter to show it to me, like the page. Cause like Kickstarter, like if it's not launched, it like,
you have to, it
refuses to show you.
Yeah.
Unless you know what to do. Now I know what to do. Like you have to go to whatever. Anyway, it's a whole thing. And so, but I put that up, set up like a landing page, and then set up social media accounts and things like that. Like I wasn't even on social media. I had never like even signed up for Facebook prior to doing this. I had zero. I started from a zero point with all of this stuff. So I started setting up all these accounts and, started using those things. And again, like Instagram, because of my visual background, was like, I feel really comfortable here because I can just make pretty things and post it here and people get excited. So that was actually the audience that I really enjoyed interacting with the most because they just like pretty stuff.
Yeah.
Twitter makes no sense to me. Facebook's like completely overwhelming. I'm like, I don't even know how to like get around in here. I'm trying my best, but with all those little channels, you're able to start like actually pointing people to places where there are content. Right. Yeah. So then when someone hears about it, you can be like, go here and voila. Right. And so that really helped a lot. And then it was only until it was maybe like, I don't know, 3 months before launching where I started actually like setting up stuff for advertising and like actually doing paid things to actually start sharing about the game and getting like an email list growing. Like I definitely would have grown an email list earlier and actually like promoted that a whole lot earlier. Looking back, I was like, I should have been doing that a lot more because that's where like.
How big was your email list? How big did you get it up to?
It was at 1,090 something people like that when it launched. So it's like not that big of an email list, honestly, right? And it's
bigger than some. I mean, 1,000's a good start.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's true. And honestly, though, like it was only at a couple hundreds, maybe like 300. I had grown organically until advertising.
Yeah.
So started, and then it like that's how it was able to grow. And honestly, that's how it funded quickly. It's 100% that email list. So.
And how often would you email people? Were you sending out like monthly reminders, weekly?
Oh no.
Daily?
No, like I had sent out maybe 3 emails prior to it. And most of them were like, we're going to be launching in a week. We're going to be launching tomorrow. And then we just launched. So I guess those are those 3.
There'll be one more.
And then there was maybe like 1 or 2.
I'm sure too, right?
And then, like there'll be some more. Yeah. And then like I've sent a few emails during the campaign to the list, but no, like my email game is, like, and this is what comes down to when you're a solo designer doing all of this yourself, is that you just have to kind of accept that there are things that you can be doing better and you would do better had you hired someone to do it.
So on that note, I notice you've got Backer Kit is listed on your page. Now, is that just for the pledge manager, or are you using them for their social media amplification, or how are they fitting in?
So they're running ads.
Okay.
So are you using the Backer Kit launch or whatever that is, or marketing? I think that's what it's called. I can't remember. I can't remember all their services.
I call it social media amplification, but whatever. The Backer Kit.
Okay, social media amplification. They're putting ads out there. Yeah. And then I also actually have Next Level Web also running ads. And so they were running ads pre-campaign, and then they've just kept a steady flow. So that's been kind of like the control ads. And then Backer Kit has a lot more flux, right? Because of the way that they do things is just a completely different way.
Yeah.
So I've actually had both of those running ads in different ways during the campaign, at least. So and then Backer Kit will be there for the pledge manager.
So what's after Oros? So, this campaign is obviously funding. You're 10 times your goal. I'm sure you're going to be 15 times your goal by the time it's done, because you got the back end hockey stick now kicking in. What's next? Or is the bug kind of bit you? Are you going to keep doing more games, or what's kind of going, where do you go from here?
Yeah, well, so I'm going to get tacos when this is all over. That's like step 1. And go to sleep. Yeah. Because I'm exhausted.
Yeah, it's tiring.
It's like the most exhausting thing, the most stressful thing I think I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
Is running a campaign. But in terms of, I've actually have like a number of expansion concepts in the works. I mean, at the pace that I can work though, as a solo designer, it's probably going to take a number of years to have all that ready, but expansions for Oros. Then there's also another game that I'd started a while ago that I'm actually really excited about. I was probably like more excited about that game than I am about Oros. That I kind of just put on ice a long time ago, just knowing that if I started going down that rabbit hole, this game would just, it wouldn't be here, right? Yeah. It just wouldn't be where it is today. And I kind of had to just like say, stop working on that. And I had to devote 100% of my effort into getting getting Oros to Kickstarter and getting it, finished. So that's really what my next thrust is, like making sure this thing gets manufactured at the quality with the details that I want, because I'm like obsessive like that. So like, that's 100% of my time. And then once that thing gets delivered, then we'll start working on other things.
Well, certainly, I think if the design up to this point in the process you've gone through is any indication of the kind of quality people can expect when they get the game, I'm sure they're going to be pretty happy with the end result.
Hope so.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to check out this campaign, there is just under 2 days left, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 2 days. Yeah.
So they can find this game on Kickstarter. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. But if you go into Kickstarter, you can just search Oros, Oros, and you can find it very easily. All the stuff that we talked about today is on there. You can see all those details and more. I encourage people to check out some of the preview videos as well, because they get into the guts of how the game works. It is super cool. There's no doubt about that. I'm probably going to back it myself. It looks like that kind of fun. Like, it's
nice,
not too heavy, but it's heavy enough that I think there's a lot of replayability there, which I think is going to be absolutely awesome. So, Brandt, I want to thank you again for coming on the podcast. I want to wish you all the best of this campaign, and can't wait to see what you got next, man.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, you take care. Cheers.
You bet.
This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply join the Facebook group Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.